Welcome to Hands-on AI Supervision by UNESCO. This series highlights the practical experiences, technical insights, and strategic priorities identified by experts working on the front lines of AI oversight. This interview series is funded by the European Union and is part of UNESCO's broader work on the ethical governance of AI.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this series of podcasts, Hand-on AI Supervisions, Lessons from Practice. My name is Doaa, Elyounes, and I'm a program specialist with the Ethics of AI unit at UNESCO. I'm very happy to have today with me Nicolas Miailhe and to talk to you about AI safety and benchmarks. This podcast series is an outcome of a roundtable that we hosted in UNESCO as part of the project Supervising AI by Competent Authority in collaboration with the Dutch Digital Infrastructure Authority, RDI, funded by the European Commission SG Reform. The roundtable took place in UNESCO at the end of September, where we hosted a series of panels as well as interactive workshop with 6 different posters, in which Nicolas hosted one of the posters and had an interactive discussion with the different supervisory authorities on the topic of AI supervision and AI safety and benchmarks, which we will be diving deeper into today. Nicolas, you are, I think, a perfect combination of someone who is working right now in a startup, previously in a big civil society organization on AI. You are teaching, you are advising governments. I think it's better that I let you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thanks a lot, my dear Doaa, and thanks for having me on that podcast. It's great to be back at UNESCO in that fantastic studio. It's great to be there and to build upon what we accomplished together when you gathered this network of supervisors at UNESCO in an effort to help build capacity, to help share problems and opportunities, and bring people like me and others who have a bit of experience and expertise to share in how we can advance and build solutions to these problems. So, as you've mentioned, I have a career in the industry. So I know a bit of transfer of technology, I know of algorithms, I know of AI. And then at the turn of 2010, I decided to focus my energy on building something which is now very well known, governance of AI. But when we started, people thought we were crazy. So I created a civil society organization called The Future Society, and was privileged to be one of the first to contribute to many of the now established soft, self and hard governance mechanisms, including the fantastic standard setting instrument that UNESCO passed at the previous General Conference, and that serves as a vessel to help build capacity, including in global majority countries, to establish standards for ethical AI. And then, because I felt in 2023 that beyond frameworks and principles, what was needed were technical, practical solutions, I started a Paris-based AI safety evaluation startup called PRISM Eval, focusing on a small slice of the evaluation and testing problem that affects cybersecurity and safety, which is the domain of malicious instructions, otherwise known as jailbreaking or prompt injection, which is the fact of pushing a large language model or an agent to elicit an unwanted behavior, like the recipe of an illegal weapon or drug, misinformation, ways to bully your teammate, or to do self-harm. And we have a platform, we're a B2B SaaS startup, and we sell solutions to developers of models, deployers of models, for them to better understand the exposure and solve this exposure of their models to these malicious instructions. So we work quite a bit with the AI safety institutes and other supervisory authorities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is very important to ensure the safety and security, because as much as we see, as you just mentioned, as much as we have very good examples of using large language models for good, the human brain is creative enough to think about very bad example of usages as well, and those are very hard to control. The developers of those models, we always see that whenever they manage to fix a bug, the crowd is faster and in finding a newer way to tweak and to force them to do things that they're not planned to do. So very critical, I think, this AI, the safety aspect of those models. And in a way, you started going in that direction. And I want you to elaborate a little bit more, if it's okay, about why the topic of AI supervision and benchmark is important for supervisory authorities.
Well, we have come to a point where the appetite for consumption of these large language models has become huge. Like there are on a daily basis something like 800 million users of ChatGPT. And so the base of usage is huge, and the industrial scale security and safety of something which is quite new in terms of a technology product is and remains preoccupying. So maybe to report from the ground on what we do every day in terms of behavioral elicitation, it's still today extremely easy to elicit bad behaviors from all the models, including those who have received a lot of investment to secure them with guardrails, with moderation, and to fine-tune them so that they have stronger what we call refusal mechanisms to harmful requests. They need to be able to respond, but not to share bad things. And so if you ask for the recipe of methamphetamine, they should, refuse sharing details as to how you can manufacture it, but share useful details on methamphetamine. The fact of jailbreaking them, meaning moving them away from their guardrails and refusal mechanisms in how they are intended by developers, remains trivial. It's too easy to jailbreak them because the underlying technical and scientific cocktail that they put into motion is extremely difficult to secure by design. These are stochastic systems by nature. They are tough to stabilize, and they are big black boxes. And so the way in which we try and understand how they behave, the way in which we test them to discover these behavioral dynamics remains today, 3-4 years after the first wave of the ChatGPT revolution, extremely important to do, because now they are used every day by everyone in very many different contexts, including by vulnerable people and including by people who tend to overestimate the degree of robustness, the efficacy and the factual accuracy of the system. So we are into a bit of a bind. And because of that wave, it's extremely important that supervisory authority, in the confine of their mission and mandate, sees the need to integrate within what is their base of operation the consideration of the safety and security risks that the system poses across sectors, automotive, medical, financial. And one of the things which was great in that network meeting was to see the congregation of supervisory authorities from very many different sectors and how they shared common challenges. So that was great to see. That was heartening to see that everyone is trying to come together to crack a few key nuts that remain, to be honest, technical and to a large extent scientific unsolved problems.
Yeah. And following up directly on that, I think it's maybe the $1 million question, but do you think we are asking too much of supervisory authorities? In a way, are we pushing the problems instead of asking the technical developers to do more? Are we pushing that burden to the government? Actually, do you think there are tools in the toolbox of the supervisory authorities to how much of the responsibility, in other ways, is the responsibility of the developers, and how much of it is the government's? Are their hands tied, or there is more that they can do in the current toolbox that they have?
My dear Doaa, I wish this was $1 million question. I wish this was $1 billion question. It has now become $1 trillion question. The wave that is hitting society, and now clearly with scientific evidence suggesting that this is affecting the way in which we behave, the mental health of many of the most vulnerable, and also creating a lot of productivity gains, create a situation where it is imperative for supervisory authorities to really look at this question and to build capacity and to reinforce their toolboxes. The toolbox is small, but it does exist. Like there are safety benchmarks, there are tools, a lot of them open source, that are now emerging, and that the supervisory authority should and can seize to build capacity to leverage the legal basis that they have in terms of supervision of how certain technology, digital technologies are deployed, algorithmic technologies are deployed, and upgrade these in the age of LLMs. But clearly they are late. Clearly, they are undercapacitated, and clearly there is a huge asymmetry of power and information between the private sector, which, if you just look at the market capitalization of NVIDIA, which manufactures those microchips that everyone uses for these LLMs and agents, they are valued at 5,000 billions. 5 trillion, that's why I said it's a $1 trillion question. And OpenAI is valued at 500 billion. Like it's the market capitalization and the ability to mobilize talent, to mobilize compute, to mobilize data, to mobilize all kinds of evaluation tools dwarfs what supervision authorities can do. And so there's a strange moment where we need to build the public-private partnerships so that we rebalance this capacity and information and power asymmetry. But right now, these partnerships look like private, public partnerships. And so we really need to engineer in a smart way, in a pragmatic way as well, a revolution in capacity building so that these authorities can discharge their mandates, can serve the citizens and the consumers and the patients they are supposed to serve in a decent way. And right now the gap is huge. So the toolbox, to your question, the toolbox exists, but it's small. And there is no way they can abandon their mandate. Like it would be reneging on the rule of law. It would be reneging on democracy. It would be reneging on the protection of the consumer, because let's also be honest. Like, will the market itself, by itself, solve everything? No. There are negative externalities, and there is a reckless race to deploying products which are in many ways prototypes, and to reach industrial scale, those negative externalities that hit the most vulnerable first need to be internalized in the development and deployment roadmaps of these very well-funded big entities. Yeah, and that's the role of supervision authority, to ensure. And what's the price? What's the consequence if we don't do that? If we do not do that, after a big accident, there will be a backlash. There will be techlash. There will be AI lash. And we are all going to suffer, especially these big companies. Now they are focused on the competition because they need to deal with this winner-takes-all political economy. But collectively, if we want sustainable innovation on the long run, we need to be able to ensure this innovation serves the citizens and is safe. Safety and security does not stifle innovation. It enables the sustaining of innovation as we move from startup to industrial scale. Like, is OpenAI a startup? No. Come on, 500 billion valuation. It's way more than the biggest market cap in Europe, which is ASML. So we are in this strange transition into the industrial scale of AI without the tools in terms of supervision. We need to build them fast.
So the toolbox is there, but it's small, and we need a collaboration of so many stakeholders to make it happen. So these are the things we will try to unpack further, but let's go back to the day and to the poster that we were discussing in the conference. I remember you had on that poster 6 kind of subtopics, which are unpacking the topic of AI safety and trying to go a little bit into the solutions realm. So perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit on those 6 subtopics that emerged in the discussion with supervisory authorities.
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. And they were subtopics, but they were framed as main challenges. And maybe let's start with the title. I was talking and trying to manage a conversation on AI safety and benchmarks. What is a benchmark? It's a form of comparison between different class of solutions and different class of models in terms of how resilient they are to different security and safety challenges, knowing that the boundary between safety and security is unclear. Like, and what we do every day at PRISM is very much that. Like, when we try and secure and understand the safety and security challenges of a model, we are trying to assess whether a teenager that is going through a crisis and could indulge in self-harm could use these models for us, as well and as much as we're trying to understand what criminals could do to build scams, for example. So the boundaries are porous. That's something which is very important. We are lacking, that's one of the main, I would say, conclusions of that debate. And that was one of the main challenges that we saw. We are lacking interoperable standards around which practitioners from different authorities and different domains can congregate to establish thresholds of what constitute, for example, a safe and secure model or not. And by sector, in healthcare is different from finance. So we are very much lacking that. That was maybe that's maybe the first challenge I'd like to put forward. Another one, which I clearly mentioned before, is this capacity gap. Like, these authorities lack the people and the infrastructure. And the people, the talented people in LLM ops, in DevOps, in infrastructure are expensive because the market is pulling them towards expensive development projects. So we are facing capacity gaps both in people and infrastructure, buying these microchips from NVIDIA, which I mentioned, and clustering them into centers that can be used to build experiments around the problems that supervision authorities are facing is expensive. So we are lacking capacity, and that translates mostly, but not exclusively, in terms of money. These authorities are lacking the money to mobilize the talent and compute infrastructure needed, and also obviously the data. Assembling high-quality data set is also something which is expensive, and a lot of that data lies in the private sector. And is the private sector going to easily share those data with supervision authorities that may find them? No, of course not. One of the problems that you face when you are a supervision authority is that you are on the other side of the line, and the line, the red line, or the line that is drawn in the sand, is the line of the law. And for a big corporation to deal with a supervision authority, you position in that relationship not engineers, you position lawyers, you position potentially litigators and general counsels who have the duty, the fiduciary duty, to protect the interest of the company. And that's why it's not easy to let the data flow in a way that you can build those standards. This capacity gap is complemented by a gap of trust which is needed because of the conflict of interest. The authority is there to protect the public. The public sector undertaking is there to protect its first its investors, its shareholders, and then its customers. So that's why it's important to mention. Other challenges that came up is obviously within the capacity gap, particularly the gap in terms of tooling. We discussed this toolbox. We need new forms of tools to be able to run adversarial dynamic attacks on these stochastic systems. Sending a few prompts won't tell you much. You need to be able to sample the behavioral landscape with enough volume and quality prompts, and that requires adversarial tools that are dynamic in nature and that are partially automatic and adaptive. We also discuss one big problem, which is the large variability from one sector to another, especially as we're moving from models to agents. Agentic pipeline is the idea of combining several large language models with several tools, like web-based tools, coding tools. And these agents are complex and are very tailored to a specific set of use cases. And so evaluating and securing them from one use case, from one sector to another without standards is complicated. So I'll leave it at that, but I think it gives you hopefully a good overview of these challenges.
Yes. Thank you very much. Big challenges, not easy to solve. I want to zoom in on one challenge that you mentioned briefly, that emerged as a key gap currently for supervisory authorities. And it's the lack of standards, shared protocols, and agreed thresholds. So why do you think this issue came through so powerful for the supervisory authorities? And you mentioned a couple of times the law. I think we are also starting to add a new actor to the mix, and is the regulators, right? Because the supervisors are the executors of the law, but we also have the layer above that kind of set the standards. Well, I mean, standards are not necessarily law. If we're talking about technical standards, you can talk about regulatory standards. So why is that?
Well, it's a great question. Another $1 trillion question, to be honest. Let's try and unpack that a little bit. The first thing I would want to say is that why are we lacking standards is because there is a huge market competition. And standards tend to crystallize and then ossify converging practice. So we have a big competition, and we have a technology which is, in terms of its productionization, relatively new. So we are basically building on top of very fresh innovation, and so electricity, which surrounds us, got standardized over time. Here we need to move very fast at an industrial scale, and the political economy, the power dynamics of a standardization process, which mobilize a lot of forces that are in competition, is not easy in a value chain which is new and emerging and unstabilized. So I think it's fully understandable why we are lacking interoperable standard. So we have something new which has become huge in terms of user base extremely quickly. That's a recipe for struggling in terms of standardizing. And that's why, as we're shaping these governance frameworks into these hopefully smart cocktails of soft and hard regulatory mechanisms, at the center of all is this notion of standardizing in an interoperable way, because we are based here in Paris, but most of the models that we consume are imported from the US. So we need these models and we need this data to travel across very many boundaries at a time of increased geopolitical tensions. And so we need these standards to both reflect competition, including geostrategic, and remain interoperable so that trade continues, business continues, including serving the most vulnerable, like how we need this trade to happen for Africa, for example, to be able to build access to these systems and then build more than access or fully control. That requires a lot of capacity. So that's for the context as to why we're struggling and why it's so important. Now, and what was the other question? Because there was a second question. One was this, but then you had another one nested, which was also very important.
The regulators?
Yes, the regulators. So in this cocktail of soft and hard, it's important that the regulators and the legislators find a pathway to impose a shift of incentives to developers and deployers that reprioritize certain outcomes, such as privacy protection, or privacy more in general, security and safety. And so we're seeing a move originating in the hard regulatory sphere from the European Union with this EUA Act that is not only an exercise in legislation, but is also an exercise in standardization. What happened when the Commission started the endeavor was not only to push a proposal on the European Parliament and European Council that became the EUA Act, but also to mobilize what we call the CEN-CENELEC, which is the European standardization entity, and demand that the legislative mandate be complemented by a standardization mandate, so that the effort to regulate offers a continuum from the legislative to the technical. That effort is very much ongoing and serves as an interesting forcing function to accelerate the establishment of these interoperable standards. And at the very core of AI, you also have a non-regulatory movement, which is important because of what I said before, in terms of how putting regulation in motion creates diffidence, creates distrust and conflict of interest between the public and the private. So there's another movement away from regulation where a number of AI safety institutes, which are non-regulators, have been created in many countries and are coordinating their efforts to create this base of evidence, these knowledge pieces, and standardizing them. And I repeat what I said at the beginning. Why it's so hard also is because there are so many unsolved remaining scientific challenges to understand the behavioral dynamics of the systems. They remain big black boxes. So we are literally flying a big aircraft at supersonic speeds while we are building it at an industrial scale. This is a huge conundrum. That's why I say it's $1 trillion question. And there are people on the other side, like there are kids that are committing suicide on the other side. So safety and security it's not something which is conceptual. Like we are seeing the first set of evidence of the real problems.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We have too many unfortunate events that can be tied to lack of safety and security, including deadly ones, which is very kind of stresses the need that it's not a luxury to have, it's a must have.
Oh yeah, like I have a 10-year-old and I worry. Why do I worry? She's about to enter into teenaging. And so because I want, and we all parents want our kids to be equipped to address the future of work, they have no choice. Unfortunately, they will have to deal with those large language models and agents. They need to be super proficient mobilizing them. But right now, I worry putting her in front of a ChatGPT or Claude because of what the systems can be used for, and because of some of the most addictive dynamics that the system exhibit because of the race to gain market share. So I worry as a father, and I'm not the only one.
No, I totally don't the only one. I have a 2-year-old and I worry because no matter how much you try to keep them away from screen, he already know how to scroll. So I don't even want to imagine what's going to be when he will be 10 years old. So
addictive business models are not new. The media and attention economy is not new, but now we're seeing the convergence of the platform economy, data economy, attention economy into something which looks like a bit of an addiction economy. That's a problem, and safety and security of these models, which can be highly addictive, should be mandatory, and self or soft governance won't suffice. And so that's why the supervision authorities, we will need a bit of regulation. It has to be as lean, as smart, as agile as possible. But let's be honest, self-governance won't cut it alone.
Yes. I think that is clear. And I think the example that you gave about the collaboration between regulation and the sense and like work on the technical standards side is basically what is currently happening with the AI Act. Is it too little, too late, or
some say too early,
too much, too early?
Yeah,
We
exactly.
are yet
That's
to
a great
figure
point.
out, right? Like we are yet to figure out, and we have a code of practice that the Commission is working on. So there is a lot of different pieces of the puzzle coming together. And I sorry.
No, go ahead. I don't want to cut you.
No, I mean, the interoperability is something that you said, and I think it's very important for how, if we are already thinking about standard, what should be kind of the key minimum to have in those standards to ensure their viability. But if we go one step further, I remember it was also something that was reflected on the poster, the question. So assuming that we manage to arrive at standards and benchmark, how they can stay relevant given that we are now talking about large language model, agentic AI, who know what we are going to be talking about next year?
Here is my message to the listeners and to the supervision authorities that are listening and trying to build those. Don't focus on standards. They are too complicated, most probably. Focus on best practices, and they are emerging. They are not best practices, they are practices. Let's all be very humble about all of that. But they are practices that are emerging, that we are observing, and as regulators, as supervisors, you are seeing and you're starting to deploy. Coordinating, sharing knowledge in earnest, closing the door among each other like we did at UNESCO in September, to share common challenges, to share common fears and common hopes around these practices is something that can be accomplished. And then try and refine and structure that. And then, if it works, try and standardize that, but not too early, because there is also like a big obstacle to standardizing regulatory practices into standards, is the fact that it's difficult for regulators to coordinate among each other. They have mandates, they have legal basis, and the beauty of the rule of law and due process in so many ways constrains their coordination potential. And because of the race and because of the competition in the private sector, and because of the fear of collusion on the private sector, and because of the fear of regulation, the private sector may also want to constrain the ability of regulators to coordinate and to consolidate. That's why it's important to move, but move around a front that can create trust on the other side. That's why I would say coordinate around shared best practices over what it means to audit, what it means to evaluate, and what is the difference, by the way, between testing, evaluation, and auditing. That's a big thing we discussed all together when we were at UNESCO at the roundtable. And these things are not the same. We can discuss that, but they are different. So that's why I would start at the level of best practices.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to perhaps think about concluding and about, I want to bring it back to the capacities, which is an issue that you strengthen a lot. You put an emphasis on. This is something that it's at the core of our work at UNESCO. This was something that was at the core of the project that this podcast is being brought to you through the Supervising AI by Competent Authority, enhancing the capacity of the supervisory authorities. I wonder if we can conclude by giving a couple of concrete suggestions on what capacities need to be enhanced and how to do so.
Yeah, well, that's great. Let's be very practical. It is urgent that mechanisms are devised to attract and hopefully retain even part-time people doing LLM ops, people doing LLM AppSec, people doing agent developments who have a base in understanding LLMs, a base in machine learning engineering, and bring them through fellowships to short-term assignments in a way that can start building the capacity of supervision authorities in a very humble way. It can take the form of events, of hackathons, but it also has to sustain beyond events. That's why I mentioned fellowships and part-time contracts. Where to look for how this is happening, in my opinion, in a good direction? The European AI Office. In the way in which, for example, they have been able to build their AI safety unit via short-term contracts, via fellowship, is something, because they're a bureaucracy, and they're a big bureaucracy, is something that is heartening. And there are things that can be learned out of that. We are sitting here at UNESCO across the street from CNIL, the French Private Protection Authority, started in 1978, which is composed of a lot of lawyers, but has also been able to attract over time a basic core of technical engineering capacity. That's something that needs to go faster and further. And I know they are all budgetary constrained, but that's also a message to governments and to private sector at arm's length, of course, because of a conflict of interest, to create the conditions for that talent to flow in a way that builds independent capacity building to think about what these mechanisms, this testing, evaluation, verification, validation, and indeed, yes, at the end of the day, supervision mechanism should be like. So that's what I would conclude with. HR, talents, be innovative, try. And because otherwise it's going to be soon too late, and the supervision authorities are going to be seen as obsolete. They cannot be seen as obsolete. And again, on the other side of the line are children, are vulnerable people, and the scamming capacity of the system, automatic or mediated, are fantastic. So it's the problem. It's just coming. The wave has just started.
Yes, wonderful conclusion. I think what is even more beautiful is that what you suggested is applicable to everywhere. I think it's applicable. We have to remember that we are UNESCO and we are serving 194 countries. And I think those recommendations are applicable to everyone. I don't know if I'm over optimistic, but I think there is also a hunger among engineers, among safety professionals to contribute to social good at the end of the day. Yes, maybe not everyone, but at the end of the day, we are seeing more and more willingness to engage with governments and to be able to shape the discourse going forward. And these are kind of like small steps that can be applicable to everyone. Would you agree?
Yeah, let me close with a step in that direction. I went around 3 years ago asking to leading technical talents what it would take for them to choose public sector as opposed to private sector, which we know rewards financially much better, of course. They pretty much all told me the following. For us to decide to join a bureaucracy, we need this bureaucracy to empower us. We need a technocracy, but a technocracy in a noble sense of the term. A place where we engineers are given real responsibilities, real power, real means to move along a research and development roadmap and effect. And so I think it's a message towards change, towards the management of change, which is the key challenge of these bureaucracies and these public service. If they want to attract these young talents, it is possible. They want to serve. They are seeing the problems that we've been discussing for the past 20 minutes. Give them responsibilities. Trust them. Empower them. They will come.
No need to say anything else. Let me just thank you very much again for being with us today, Nicolas. Thanks for a wonderful episode. I learned a lot. I'm sure also our listeners. And we look forward to welcome you again to another episode of this podcast series, Hands-on AI Supervisions, Lessons from Practice. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to Hands-on AI Supervision, an interview series by UNESCO. This series highlights the practical experiences, technical insights, and strategic priorities identified by experts working on the front lines of AI oversight. To continue the conversation and learn more about UNESCO's work on AI ethics, policy, and in culture, science, and education, follow us at unesco.org. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.